It's here, it's time, it's the most glorious moment of the year. Everything builds up to this video, and I always have an enormous amount of fun doing this. Even if the ranking ends up being super stressful, the end result is always a good time, even if the inevitable controversy can sometimes feel a little bit exhausting. Just remember, I'm one dude on the internet, and these are just my opinions, so without wasting any more time, let's get right into what you've all come here for. The 15 best albums of 2025. Kicking things off at number 15, we've got the Opethian-inspired little masterpiece from Sindar, Tower of the Sun. Now, I forget how exactly it was that I found this one, I really do, but I can't imagine a world where I don't have this kicking around the cavernous empty spaces that is the inside of my head. I'm always weak for anyone who can evoke the memories of early Opeth within me, and doubly so if they can still do so with their own vibe and their own voice and their own identity. This is an album chock full of bangers, gnarly riffs, incredible vocal delivery, and so much variety to the moods found within. You've got the big death metal, sure, but then it frequently goes full-on acoustic folksy rock without missing a beat. Honestly, if you told me this was a lost album from Opeth's earliest years, I'd be half tempted to believe you. But the fact this still sings with its own voice and is the output of just two people, plus a few guests, it makes Tower of the Sun all the more extraordinary. In a lot of ways, Sindar represents what I love about doing this channel. To find a small independent band like this who've blown my head wide open with their sound and their compositions. To stand toe-to-toe with some of the huge names that are going to appear on this list and still make a hell of a noise in doing so. Sindar have surprised me in the best possible way, putting out a true standout independent record and one I've spent a good chunk of my year getting very familiar with. Igor, Amen. The first but certainly not the last absolutely mental album to appear on this list. Igor have always had a knack, a flair, a habit for the weird and especially deranged, and Amen is certainly no exception to this rule, but what they're bringing around this time is a more song-focused, more succinct experience, where things are less chaotic in structure, but still in style. I've been a long-time fan of this band, and Amen is easily my favourite thing they've put out in a very long time. It strikes that perfect balance of sure, why the hell not, and actually wait no, dial it back a bit, to make for their most accessible album to date. Although that's not to say this is exactly co-worker music or anything. If you whack Blast Beat Falafel on at the office Christmas party, don't come crying to me when you find your P45 in your inbox the following morning. Ultimately though, despite the album's eccentricities, there's a remarkably cohesive through-line guiding the album. Sure, it's a quirky one that isn't afraid to be what it needs to be to tell its stories, but it's a robust record full of unique personality, and Igor continues to stand in a world of their own, which you'll either love or you'll hate. Personally, I think it's bloody fantastic, and Amen continues to be on pretty regular rotation for me. Psychonaut, Worldmaker. I was stunned how much I loved this album, and while that might sound like a bit of a backhanded compliment, let me just explain myself here. I'm usually very, very, very hard to please with this sort of fuzzy, psychedelic, Tool X Mastodon adjacent music. It's just not normally my kind of thing. I generally find it all a bit too homogenous. There's not enough that pops or sticks out of the soupy music. But then sometimes I realise, hang on a minute, Soup is amazing, and Worldmaker is a truly restorative stew of music. Everything about this album screams flow. It's all so buttery smooth and velvety rich in its textures and its atmospheres that I can't help but demand more and more of it even long after the final track is played out. There's these great riffs, fantastic vocal performances, varied and interesting instrumental runs, and little dips into Pink Floydian minimalism across the album's runtime, and it manages to give just enough of an accent to this type of music for it to perfectly match my own personal spice requirements. It took me a very short amount of time to fall for Worldmaker, but it took a few months for me to realise just how special this one is. This is like a kind of bridging album for me. It's one that's opening up doors for me into adjacent bands, but also stands tall on its own as one of the more creative and sonically enriching things I've listened to this year, and I've not been able to leave it alone. Hadal Sherpa, Voidweaver, and Memoria. Okay, so bear with me here, because I'm technically lumping two albums into one slot here. Yes, I would still have this on my list if it was just Voidweaver, and for the sake of fairness to the list, I'm still ranking it as if it was just Voidweaver. But Memoria came out on December 5th, so I want to touch briefly on that one as well. I've been a huge fan of this band for years now, so to finally have their sophomore land in my lap only for tragedy to strike the band, with lead songwriter Vesa Pasanen unexpectedly leaving us only a couple of months after Voidweaver came out, it was extremely sobering, and it has made subsequent listens weigh much heavier on me. But in honour of Vesa, he really did pull out all the stops on both of these records. Now, instrumental music rarely lands this hard for me, but Hadal Sherpa have always had that secret sauce, that rare and irreplaceable X factor that makes the guitars truly sing and speak to me as a listener. I never miss vocals when I'm listening to Voidweaver and Memoria, because the instrumentation here does so much talking, so much language is behind the strings, that if you added vocals here, you'd actually spoil things. Nothing else this year has felt this spacey, this hypnotic and locked in. Every time I listen to these albums, it's like I've blinked and time has moved forward with no effort whatsoever. They're delightfully easy to listen to, but with so much hidden depth and nuance to them. They truly are one of the most talented bands in the modern prog rock scene. So to Vesa, I raise a glass and say thank you for the music. Between the Buried and Me, The Blue Nowhere. Some of you, I'm sure, will feel shocked that this album is this low in my rankings, given that I am a self-confessed excitable screaming fanboy of the band, and will often cite Colours as the greatest album of all time forever and ever, amen. But I think it is my drooling, obsessive side that has put this just outside of the top 10. I treat them harder, even though I probably shouldn't, and as a result I couldn't bring myself to position this above anyone else further on in this list. Does this mean that I dislike The Blue Nowhere? Now, why would you even ask that question? It's one of the best albums of the year, so take those silly words and thoughts out of yourself and don't think so negatively of me. I adore this record. I love how it feels simultaneously like a greatest hit, but also exists within its own space and own language in their greater discography. The band definitely had their work cut out for them with the whole dusty situation, but Paul Wagner continues to demonstrate why he's one of my favourite prog metal guitarists of all time here, picking up the slack and sprinting to the finishing line with it. We've got so much chaos and anarchic destruction present on this album, but it's tempered with some of their softest and most accessible work to date as well, crafting an album that's salty and sweet in equal measure, and in some ways the new gold standard for introducing people to the band with. Is it Colours? God no, but only Colours is Colours. The Blue Nowhere is, however, still a smorgasbord of delightful sounds and ideas that stands proud as another sterling entry into a band with a continuously faultless discography. Der Weg einer Freiheit Inern, Vinyls in the Post. Fresh off their win for the biggest grower in my awards video, Der Weg einer Freiheit Inern has well and truly earned its place in the final 15 and perhaps more crucially into the top 10. I've been looking and hoping for this kind of Cult of Luna adjacent wintry black metal all year, and while other bands in this space might have tickled the itch, it was only truly Inern that ever scratched it. What I've come to appreciate about this album is how much of a record of two halves it feels like. Yes, the front end is most assuredly your typical modern black metal, with huge, crushing, icy cold riffs and growled vocals from the pits of hell itself, but it's how well it blends this aggressive aesthetic with a kind of subtle, muted come-down in the back half of the album. It breathes, it relaxes its tensed muscles and opens itself up with a kind of charming vulnerability that you simply wouldn't expect given the earlier parts of the record. It feels like a band maturing into their own sound and realizing that you can't play with one key feature for the length of an entire record without risking fatigue setting in by the end. In a lot of ways, it feels like a reflection of myself. I'm at the entry point very loud, very boisterous, and at times a little bit much, but give me enough time and I'll finally settle down and enter my more introspective era. Inern is cut of this cloth, and even if you don't enjoy the heavy and aggressive start and midpoints of the album, it's that crash zoom into a gentler world at the end that sealed the deal for this album's inclusion in the final lineup of the year for me. Changeling, self-titled. If we were doing a ranking of progressive tech death, then Changeling's astonishing debut album would be so far ahead of the competition it would take them all 3 years to catch up. I've historically always been a little bit middling on the genre, as I've always felt it put too much emphasis on haha look what I can do, whilst leaving the heart and feeling to the wayside, lost and forgotten to the winds of playing 800 notes a minute whilst hanging upside down and kissing the Blarney Stone. This is Fountainhead's masterpiece, and while I've always enjoyed his works on pretty much everything that he's ever done, this is where he has truly come into his own, both creatively and instrumentally. Now, this eschews all my usual complaints with technical death metal, but still keeps the core of the genre burning at the heart of it all. It's fast, it's brutal, and it's aggressive, of course it is, but it's also got a solid narrative through line and takes time to bring in unexpected twists and turns to make sure that it always leaves you in a perpetual state of never knowing what's coming next. The final track off the album was a contender for Epic of the Year, and it was a very, very close run with that category. But the album taken as a whole, if appreciated for its entire self-contained self, would have easily snatched the Epic Award. There's not much else on this list that dropped my jaw from a sheer technical perspective as much as Changeling did, and the fact that even now, many months after its initial release, there are still these little hidden nuggets buried deep in the mix that take my breath away and have only recently revealed themselves to me. It tells you everything you need to know about this towering monolith of excellence. The Callous Daoboys, I Don't Want to See You in Heaven. A few years ago, when the Daoboys dropped Celebrity Therapist, I very swiftly fell in love with them, and they secured a spot on my year-end list then. So here we are in 2025, and they are once again repeating that success with an album that emulates everything I loved about their previous work, but one that also manages to build and expand on it, in ways that I simply wasn't expecting, and I'm still not sure that we thoroughly deserve. Presented through and through as a concept piece about a museum exhibit of their lost works, I Don't Want to See You in Heaven is a delightfully overblown, incredibly self-indulgent smattering of some of the Daoboys' most artistically creative and exciting works to date. There's everything on here that you would come to expect of them, but just as equally everything you wouldn't. For every chaotic whirlwind on the album, see Idiot Temptation Force, Tears on Lambo Leather, and Schizophrenia Legacy, there's just as many pauses in the action for something completely unexpected, like Body Horror for Birds, Lemon, or Douchebag Safari. It is an incredibly adventurous piece of work that remains in heavy rotation for me, and it's their full embrace of a more progressive mindset that's kept this as a consistently interesting and rewarding work of art that's more than worthy of inclusion as a museum piece. Where on earth they'll go next after this one is anyone's guess. A return to the more stripped-down savagery of their earlier works, or a full embrace of their softer, more progressive sensibilities. Whatever you want to do, guys, you can bet your ass I'll be watching and waiting with bated breath. ILO Legacy. Good things come to those who wait, and excellent things come to those who wait just a teensy bit longer, and boy and Lord Almighty was the wait for ILO's sophomore album more than worth it. Yes, I would have liked something from this fabulous British band a little bit sooner, but if this is what they can come up with when allowed to cook, then they can take all the time in the kitchen that they bloody well please. This is the kind of progressive metal that I've been really craving lately. This kind of riff-heavy, synth-heavy, vocally-driven epic of scale and sound. There's not a single moment on Legacy that I didn't adore. Not a single section of this album that doesn't make me want to punch God on the nose and say, "You hear that? That's what I was after." There's just so many moments on this album that make the hairs stand up on the back of my neck that it just feels like over an hour's worth of being blue-balled by the entire record. And that back end of the album with the title track and Signals is just about as perfect an ending experience as I could have asked for. If I was ranking these albums purely on the closing track experiences, then it would be a bloody hard fight to the death between Legacy and Changeling, let me tell you that. Ultimately, this is one of the best examples of modern progressive metal that's been released in the 2020s. It's accessible but bombastic, melodic but angular, and it carries a sense of scale and power that only this kind of music is capable of. I just hope that we're not waiting quite as long for a follow-up next time round, as given half the chance, ILO could be the world beaters this genre truly deserves. Car 1, Way Home. God, I love post-rock. It's fast becoming one of my go-to genres, and while there's been some stiff competition for what's been my favourite example of the genre this year, it was Car 1's Way Home that landed the hardest with me. I don't know if it's just the time of year this has come to me or what, but there's been something so chilling about this record that I've been unable to shake it from my shoulders, and it has only just missed out on the top 5 albums of the year. Presented as a single unified piece of music, and obviously should be treated as such, this is an emotionally heavy experience from start to finish. Picking a single 10-second snippet for this one felt like a rather pointless endeavour, as this sort of music can't be impressed upon with such a short time frame. Way Home is big, it's sweeping, and it's incredibly moving in its proportions. Everything on this album lumbers and takes its time, but as with all of the best post-rock, it's not so much about the destination as it is the journey. This isn't an album full of catchy hooks and sick beats. It's an album built on its emotional build-ups and payoffs, and it's how well it manages the heavy emotional weighting of its music that makes it so special. By the time the final moments of this record pan out, I am left, frankly, gasping for breath. It's an absolutely monstrous record with its payload. There have been very few albums released this year that have left such an indelible mark on my very soul, but Way Home is most assuredly one such record. A lot of this comes down to just how good this album sounds as much as anything else. There was a good reason I gave this the award for the best mixing and production, but it's the subtleties and power of the compositions that carried this as far as it has made it. A truly mesmerizing experience, but just not quite enough to break it into the top 5. Jacob Roberge, The Passing. All hail the king of modern progressive rock, for truly Jacob Roberge has taken the crown in that regard. If I was purely a prog rock channel and didn't have such a bias and affinity for the large, angry and shouty genres, then Jacob would be standing atop the mountain clutching the Album of the Year award in all of its digital, non-tangible glory. Considering that this came out at the end of January, but it's still my favourite neo-prog rock album of the year, should tell you enough of just how good of a record this is. The closing 32-minute-long title track was awarded the Epic of the Year award, but that's only half the story here. The 5 other songs on this album more than carry their own weight, each and every one of them offering just a little bit of a different piece of Jacob's songwriting styles, and showing off a sense and flavour for the extremes and bombast that can so often be associated with this type of music. The orchestrations here are spine-chilling. Jacob's vocals reach for the skies and grab a hold of the damn moon. The piano aches with a mournful beauty, and the whole experience leaves me feeling chilled to the bone, shaken to my core, and desperate to hear it again over and over and over. It's not very often that someone can come along out of nowhere and roundhouse kick their own influences in the face to supersede almost everything they've done in the last 20 years. But Jacob has succeeded on this album in ways that Neal Morse simply isn't managing for me right now. The influences here are very obvious. Yes, the compositions are very Morsean in their nature, but the secret sauce I once felt on albums like Sola Scriptura, like Testimony 2, like The Similitude of a Dream, has been well and truly passed off to Jacob Roberge. If this is the sort of mastery of the genre that we can expect from Jacob going forwards, then frankly it's move over Morsefest and roll on Robergefest. An extraordinary album, one for the ages, and only at number 5 due to my preference for heavier and more aggressive music. Take a bow, Jacob. You bloody well earned it. FMEB, Allo Barbare et les Caramboleurs. Oh mon Dieu, il y a un truc français dans la vidéo. Vous y croyez? This is another album that's been knocking around my head since January, and I've not been able to shake it from my psyche. FMEB have perfectly categorized pure French insanity into a progressive metal opus, and honestly, it defies general categorization to make for something that can only exist as an entity unto itself. From its self-aware composition of 3 songs of 11 minutes 11, 22 minutes 22, and 33 minutes 33 runtimes respectively, to the absolute absurdity of its lyricism and full embrace of French humour and puns, this is the most unhinged and unforgettable album of the year. If Igor's Amen is the kind of quirky that makes you feel uncomfortable, then Allo Barbare is the kind of quirky that will make you burst out laughing at the absurdity of it all. There's so much music going on here, and so many ideas that are presented in such an unexpected and unpredictable fashion that the whole experience will fly by in no time whatsoever. If we're not dealing with weird segues into 90s nightclub bangers with vocals reminiscent of YTMND classic mean Chacaron, then we're being serenaded with the Gremlins theme tune being inserted apropos of nothing. It's just absolutely mad. I love my music to carry a maximum level of insanity, and FMEB have done a remarkable job of making something that not only fills up my weirder meter, but also makes a lasting impression in terms of its compositional excellence and instrumental performances. This is an extraordinary album. There's nothing else this decade that I can compare this to. And just for the sheer audacity of its existence, the fact that this sort of record can exist in 2025, and just how often I've come back to this one, the thought of this being anywhere else in the year-end list was just off the cards for me. This has been my go-to album to recommend to people this year, as it's highly likely that people will have never heard anything like this, and this is my final call to arms of 2025 to not let this album pass you by. Just prepare yourself for the madness within. Sit back, pay attention, and do have fun. Moron Police, Pachinko, not yet out on physical. Ha ha! Not number 1! Not number 2! Yes, I'm still wrestling with this internally, and there's still part of me that thinks in a year's time will I regret not putting this at the top of the pile. Maybe, maybe not, but I was determined not to let recency bias upset the apple cart, even though part of me really, really wanted to let it do so. So obviously I reviewed this pretty recently, so if you want my full thoughts and or feelings, then you can always check out that video. But I'll try and sum things up here for you as well. Pachinko is an extraordinary journey. This is the kind of album that I've recommended to people from all walks of life, of all sorts of musical affinities, and every single one of them has loved this album from start to finish. This is the sort of life-affirming music that only comes around once in a blue moon, and the fact that Pachinko has resonated so strongly with so many people should tell you everything you need to know about this. We've been waiting a long time for Pachinko, and the whole experience feels like such a level up for the band in so many ways, both musically, artistically, and creatively. Coming in at nearly double the length of their last album, Moron Police have embraced the progressive rock lifestyle with Pachinko, and it makes their sound so much richer and so much more exciting. There is a physical release allegedly coming to Kickstarter soon, so I will definitely be getting on that when it launches. But to try and summarize this album in such a short space of time, it's nearly impossible. But to call this anything less than one of the most exciting and moreish albums of the year would be woefully inadequate. It's only really been the extra time I've had with the next two albums that have kept this one from ranking higher. So who knows, maybe if this had come out a few months ago, I'd be having a very different conversation with you in this video. An Abstract Illusion, The Sleeping City. This race was so close, you have no idea. The gap between this album and the number one pick was measured in millimeters. So honestly, don't get too hung up on the differences between them, as for all intents and purposes, this may as well be number one as well. I talk about progressive metal a lot on this channel, and there have been few albums that have come out this year that have truly embraced the idea of progression quite so much as The Sleeping City has. In 2022, I placed the band's sophomore album, Woe, extremely high in my year-end rankings, so it came as very little surprise to me that this one has done similarly as well. But it's how much the band have expanded on their sound and their ideas that have made The Sleeping City such a thrill. This is no mere progressive death metal album. There's so much more going on here than what may appear on face value. The use of synth is nothing new to the genre, true, but it's how effectively and how interestingly these synth elements have been incorporated into the core sound of the album's aesthetics that have made this such a memorable experience. We're not just talking about throwing a keyboard solo or two in here from time to time. The electronica passages form the spine of the experience, with the death metal moulding around it to make for an album that feels fundamentally shifted from their previous outings, but still very much built around their principal songwriting ideology. The overall experience of this album is near perfect to my ears. It ebbs and flows like a river, curving around and moving slowly in some parts and then rushing forward like a torrent in others. It is never boring, always bringing something exciting to the front and making sure that the listener is challenged but never overwhelmed by the experience. From the power and the fury of the vocals to the eclectic and engaging guitar work, there's more in here than just the sumptuous keyboards, and it all comes together into a razor-sharp point and explosive finale. The Sleeping City is yet another masterpiece from a band who've yet to misfire, and if they can keep this momentum going, then history will truly remember them as one of the greatest progressive death metal bands of all time. Deafheaven, Lonely People with Power. Okay, so I'm pretty sure some of you probably figured out months ago what my number one pick was going to be, but rather than subvert expectation purely for the haha gotcha element, I've embraced my predictability and will be using it to armor myself with. So for all of my posturing excitement with this album, for the fact that I consider it to be the best album of 2025 and in a lot of ways possibly the best album of the decade so far, as I've sat in my living room trying to figure out what to say, how to express and communicate what I feel about this record, I've been drawing a little bit of a blank. So let's go a little bit stream of consciousness here and let's see what happens. Deafheaven have often been the band that completes my musical year whenever they put something out. Even the often maligned and often misunderstood Infinite Granite holds a very special place in my heart. Sunbather is one of my favourite albums of all time, and I truly never thought that this band would ever reach those peaks again. Now, it's taken time for me to get to this point, but I feel comfortable now saying that Lonely People with Power is a better album than Sunbather. Now, this isn't to detract or pull away from that record, quite the opposite in fact. This record runs because Sunbather walked before it. Everything the band has learnt up until this point is present and correct on Lonely People with Power. This is an album built of moments, of little pockets of astonishment, to the point where I can scarcely believe it's real. Even now, after I've listened to this album in excess of 30 times this year, it still thrills me. It still gives me cause to hold my breath at its peaks and makes me want to break down in tears at its emotional climaxes and dislocate my neck to its thrashy, aggressive, anger-fueled, riff-laden core. Albums like this don't come around very often, and when they do, we remember them for decades. Blackwater Park, Scenes from Memory, Remedy Lane, Colours, The Human Equation, Second Life Syndrome. Lonely People with Power. Deafheaven were already in the history books for me with everything they'd done prior to this, but with this album they've proven to the doubters that there is still plenty of juice left and still a myriad of ideas and abilities behind the band. And for me, the thought of putting this anywhere less than the finest album of 2025 was something I just couldn't do. Bravo, Deafheaven, and thank you for having such a profound impact on me this year. So there we go. That's 2025 all done, all dusted. It's been a hell of a year with dozens of incredible albums released by dozens of amazing bands. To say that 2026 has got its work cut out for it in terms of quality would be putting it very politely. So with the dust now settling, I'd love to hear what you think of this list. Who did I snub? Who did I overrate? Was Lonely People with Power your least favourite album of the year? Did you think Sleep Token was better than it? Let me know your album of the year in the comments down below. Now, I will be taking a couple of weeks off for the Christmas period, guys, but I might find time to slip in some quick and fun content in the interim. But if I don't see you before the new year, then have yourself a merry old time, peace on earth, goodwill to all, etc., etc. Take very good care of yourselves, and I'll see you again in 2026, where we'll do this all over again. But until next time, guys, as always, keep your rhyme signatures pretty odd.